Wondered how high the turrets of Russian tanks can fly, and why this happens specifically with Russian tanks and not with Western ones? Ukraine has long been using Western tanks like the Leopard on the battlefield, and Russians have already knocked out quite a few of these tanks. However, we have never seen the turrets of a Leopard tank flying into the air. Why? After all, Russians have long claimed that Western tanks are no better than Russian ones. Putin personally praised the Russian T-90 tank publicly.
Т-90 прорыв лучший танк в мире. Вот сейчас можно сказать, что Т-90 прорыв лучший танк в мире.
Well, Mr. Putin, we here see your T-90 tank on the battlefield, how it tries to fight. But here, we see how, after you hit from a Ukrainian anti-tank missile, it turns into a pile of battered metal. And we've seen many such cases. I've watched almost all available documentary videos of burning Leopards, and the turrets of all tanks remained in place. The maximum damage is smoke or fire inside the tank. One can make a clear conclusion that Western tanks do not experience turret separation. They can simply burn inside. Furthermore, these tanks can be restored. A similar situation occurs with Israeli Merkava tanks. They often face various anti-tank weapons, including Russian ones. But we have never seen the turret of an Israeli tank flying into the air. But Russian tanks are designed in a way that they themselves are a huge bomb on wheels, ready to explode at any minute. At the beginning of the war, no one suspected how vulnerable Russian tanks were. It was believed that tanks like the T-72, T-80, and T-90 could only be destroyed with special anti-tank missiles like Javelin or Enla. However, one time, Ukrainians realized that a Russian tank could be killed even by a small drone, the key being to hit the right spot. Look at these video frames. An abandoned Russian tank was hit by a small FPV kamikaze drone. And after the smoke from the explosion cleared, we see that the tank turret is lying on the ground. This tank is beyond recovery. Another example, an FPV drone hits a Russian tank on a combat mission. And again, we see how, from a massive explosion, the tank turret soars to an incredible height, possibly more than 50 meters. That's the height of a 16-story building. Keep in mind that the turret of any Russian tank, along with the gun, weighs approximately 2 tons. As it falls, the tank turret can produce an additional explosion if ammunition is stuck inside. But usually, the turret falling from a 50-meter height can literally get stuck in the ground. Whether it falls down with the gun or the other way around, the turret can get stuck even in asphalt like it's butter. Can you imagine if such a turret fell on someone's house? Interestingly, when a tank explodes with a full ammunition load, the explosion can be so powerful that barely anything remains of the tank. From the very beginning of the war in Ukraine, we have witnessed more exploded Russian tanks than in the previous 80 years. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of video evidence, but there are plenty of photo confirmations. Ukrainian roads were scattered with parts of Russian tanks and their turrets. For a long time, no one cleared them, and people curiously examined these tank remnants, taking pictures against their backdrop. Perhaps at the start of the war, the Russians themselves didn't suspect that their tanks would explode so easily. Russians are well aware of this, so at the first sign of smoke, tank crews swiftly abandon their tanks and flee as far as possible. Tankers who, despite everything, continue to attack while inside the tank truly deserve medals for courage. Death is so ingrained in the DNA of Russian tanks that even from above, the detached turret of a Russian tank oddly resembles an alien skull. Western tanks like Leopard, Challenger, or Abrams may not be perfect and also have vulnerabilities, but at least they guarantee the lives of their crews. The likelihood that the crew remains unharmed after being hit by an anti-tank missile is very close to 100%. I want to emphasize once again that throughout Ukraine's use of Western tanks, we have not seen detached Leopard or Abrams turrets. Ukrainian soldiers note that Western tanks indeed preserve their lives. The autoloader in the Russian tank is a convenient invention, but any crew would prefer the hard work of manual loading over evaporating into the sky with a detached tank turret. Tanks T-72 and T-80 were specifically designed to combat Western tanks. Soviet engineers had to create a tank that was cheap, fast and maneuverable. But the safety of the crew was not a priority at all. In Western tanks, the ammunition is housed in a special armored capsule separate from the crew. This capsule has a special blowout panel with an opening. When a projectile hits the ammunition and detonates, the entire energy and pressure from the explosion escape through this panel upwards, while the crew is protected by a special armor. After the ammunition detonates, the crew remains unharmed and can easily exit the tank. Designers were happy, crews were happy, and nobody got turned into an involuntary astronaut. In Russian tanks, the ammunition is located in a special autoloading mechanism beneath the crew. In fact, the crew sits on it like a powder keg. When the ammunition detonates, a powerful explosion of all projectiles occurs simultaneously, creating enormous pressure that forces all the energy of the explosion upward into the space of the turret where the crew is located. If the autoloading mechanism in Russian tanks is fully loaded, the pressure is so strong that it detaches the tank turret and lifts it dozens of meters into the air. Another drawback of the Russian autoloaders is that, due to their design, the ammunition is placed on the tank floor. This means that if the tank runs over a powerful mine, the mine's explosion can trigger the detonation of the ammunition inside the tank. We've also observed such cases on the battlefield. A very similar situation occurs with Russian self-propelled howitzers Tu-S-19. The designers of this vehicle did not provide any mechanisms to protect the crew from the explosion of the ammunition. That's why such a howitzer can easily be turned into a fireball with just a kamikaze drone armed with a shaped charge grenade. Therefore, based on all the aforementioned, I have come to a clear conclusion for myself that the only advantage of Russian tanks and any other Russian armored vehicles lies in their affordability and high quality. Russians understand this too, so sometimes they use their armored vehicles as ordinary explosive-filled cans instead of taking the wheel themselves. Perhaps